right, today we have Vitaly Gordon, who is the co-founder and CEO of Faros. And I'll actually dive right in and I'll ask Vitaly, like, what does Faros do and what problem do you solve before you give us sort of your founding history of the company?
Yeah, so Faros is an infrastructure for engineering operations that really brings all of engineering data together in one place to give engineering leaders kind of the single pane view of their entire software development lifecycle. So we collect all of the data and we make it presentable, actionable, and insightful.
hmm And how did you come up with this idea?
So the journey first kind of takes me back. Prior to starting this company, I was a VP engineering at Salesforce, and I started there the machine learning group. And as part of being a kind of leading a business unit at a company like Salesforce, I had to also kind of take care of the other kind of business responsibilities. And I was interacting a lot with sales, marketing, finance, and not just doing engineering. And one of the things that I kind of realized that was very surprising to me is just how much more data driven those functions in a company are compared to the engineering functions. And if you look at the personnel, it's quite obviously that is not due to the lack of skills in an engineering department. Like comprises of highly analytical people, but something was missing because none of the work was extremely data driven. And so I started kind of diving more and more, thinking about like how can we make engineering more data driven, because if we buy into this narrative of software is eating the world, we have to become better at managing software. And so we started at Salesforce, and after some time there of working, it became the pet project became my main project, and eventually myself and two of my co-founders decided to leave and start Faros as an independent company.
Got it. Okay. And maybe for context, so if your user is an engineering leader, I assume,
Yeah.
when you talk about these metrics, where do you go for that? Like, what are the systems we're talking about?
So the kind of the system are the usual suspects is like the software that it starts usually with the kind of task management system. Like probably the most well known is the Atlassian's Jira there, and there's a few kind of small, but Jira definitely has gigantic market share. Compared to any of its competitors. That actually was one of the most surprising things of building this company, is just realizing how large the market share in the enterprise is. And then it followed by the source control systems, the GitHub, GitLab, Bitbuckets of the world, and quite obviously the CI/CD systems, whether it's Jenkins or Harness or GitHub Actions, and then even kind of these incident management system like PagerDuty or kind of VictorOps. And also there's quality assurance system, whether it's SonarQube, and the list just goes on. And obviously also the HR systems play a big role, whether the work days kind of the world, and there is kind of about half a dozen additional categories where we take data from.
So you just rattled down a number of systems that are involved in shipping software, or maybe responding to an
Yep.
incident. And what and so and these systems now have data about my engineering team's productivity or their behavior,
Yep.
right? And what you're doing is you're making that data come alive.
Yes.
And the way you do that, and maybe you can share a dashboard in little bit, the product, what this looks like, is you take all these metrics, run some transformations on it, and provide actionable metrics. Roughly
Yep.
correct? Got it.
Yes.
And how, so can you walk us through that process, how that works and what the end result looks like? I think that would be super interesting to see. And what are some of the key innovations that you've built?
Yeah. So the kind of idea of how a solution would look like was heavily inspired by kind of what's known as the modern data stack, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically what something we have observed. Definitely, as I was part of Salesforce, one of the things that we were discussing internally is just all of the use cases that tend to take data out of Salesforce, put it in some data warehouse, do some processing on top of it, write it back in some cases, and that kind of been coined by I am not sure whom, as kind of this modern data stack. And but one of the things that we have observed that there are um, kind of we a little bit threw out the baby with the bathwater when we transitioned to this way of doing things, where we kind of lost all of the domain expertise that exists in this more specific apps like Salesforce around the schema. How do you kind of manage? And every single company then had to reinvent the wheel and kind of go and do that again and again and again. And basically, they were like implementing a lot of things, because if you kind of break it down to that solution, the thing that you care about is getting insights and visibility into your sales process. The thing that you end up spending, let's say, a year of 10 engineers on is moving data around, is organizing it, is creating visualization dashboards and kind of all of that. So like 90% of the work is completely undifferentiated between companies. So Faros is kind of a play on that, but like, what if we can take all the best things that you have in the modern data stack, which is flexibility and actually you owning your own data and being able to ask any questions about that. However, we keep also the kind of domain expertise, which is also kind of how do we move that data around, how do we organize it, how we query it, how we optimize it so that the queries will be performant and kind of all that. Because if you know the domain, then you can optimize so many different things, where basically your user at the end of the day will only need to do the things they actually care about, which is kind of deriving the insights that are unique to their business.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. When we prepped for this interview, we talked about this different, or the difference between maybe infra engineers and data engineers. And there's certainly no shortage of engineering skills in an engineering organization, right?
Yeah.
But do you feel like there was a disconnect between understanding that the data exists and the ability to take it and make it actionable, and that's basically the problem you're solving? Is that something you see in today's engineering organizations?
Yeah, so I'll go back to kind of the analogy I had with sales and marketing. So
Hmm.
what we found is, and probably you might argue like the core thesis for Fars's existence is that there is a very high correlation between having data easily accessible and organized to a function that uses that data being highly data driven. And what we found when we started, building such a tool at Salesforce, is that actually engineering is probably, the most fragmented stack of them all, in a sense that all of the tools are optimized for helping you with improving your workflows, as opposed to getting insights around what actually is happening. So back when, if you think about when a company like Salesforce started, it used to be basically an Oracle database with some app on top of it. That was the entire stack. Now to launch a dog walking website, you just need like 10 different solutions, right? And
Hmm.
so that fragmentation now has a cost, and that cost is the visibility into kind of a more holistic visibility in what's going on. And what we start doing is kind of swinging the pendulum back by integrating into all of those systems and taking data, organize it in one place that makes it very easy to access, query, and kind of do things like that, in order to kind of have those insights when you need them, and not spend engineering resources every time you want to compute one metric.
Hmm. Hmm. Can we talk a little bit about the modern data stack and what it is and how you use it as part of Pharos? And by the way, I think we should probably tell people that Pharos comes from the Greek word lighthouse, right? So it shines a light, right? And it
Yes.
helps you navigate when it's dark at night.
Yeah, exactly. So we were kind of heavily inspired by this like kind of more maritime analogies that start kind of permeating through our industry, with starting with Docker and then Kubernetes, and then we kind of took it one step further, and like so Faros is the lighthouse that shows the helmsman of kind of where to sail. uh, but yeah, so the modern data stack, at least the way I understand it, is a set of tools that are now seem to be more and more common between kind of these, I would say, kind of more modern companies on how to actually take data from kind of various systems and process it, and then kind of going back, getting that data back into these real system. And I think it also addresses the thing that most of the systems that we use today were not designed and optimized for analytics workloads. That
Hmm.
is, and I'm talking both on the, just the queries, that you can do on top of them, or the reporting, and obviously also now, as the world become kind of more and more kind of fragmented with the kind of explosion of SaaS, in many cases you just don't have like kind of the data that you need in every single system, right? There, it's
Hmm.
kind of siloed. So the way people started approaching it is to really kind of ETL that data into kind of a centralized data warehouse that usually is a Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift. The ETL tool is usually, on the old side is like Informatica. The more kind of modern manifestation can be something like a Fivetran. Um, or kind of a Airbyte is another kind of open source competitor. And I think there was also at some point, and I think probably that is what gave a lot of kind of explosion to the field. What also was unique that they figured out is how you can kind of lower the barrier of entry, that you don't actually need data engineers. And by switching, and again, from an ETL kind of thing to where the transformation has to be as the data streaming into its kind of final location, to an ELT, which is the data, kind of synchronized first and then transformed on kind of inside the data warehouse. It now meant that in order to perform these transformations, you don't need a kind of sophisticated data engineer. You actually need someone with just basic kind of SQL skills, and those are far, far more readily available. And that also kind of gave birth to tools like DBT that you can actually manifest, and you have these kind of almost like a macro language that is, very similar kind of to SQL, that you can actually perform all of those transformation. And now it became kind of much easier as the tools became better and better on getting that high level of insights by getting data from systems like, Salesforce and Stripe and some other that will sales, and have these richer insights that were not possible in the original systems.
And what you just said is that's what got me excited when I saw Faros for the first time, because I think you're pioneering a completely new approach that we haven't seen so far yet today, which is like taking data that exists but wasn't optimized for analytical purposes. You take that and you put it in a format to enable analytics, right? And that helps me to create metrics that help me to better understand my business. And um, Vitaly, is it okay if we do a quick screen share and maybe we look at your GitHub repo,
Yeah,
and I can share or you can share?
sure. I can try to do it fairly quickly, and let's see if you can see my screen now. And this is our kind of GitHub repo for our kind of community edition of our
Uh-huh.
product that we share. And these are some of the charts that come as you connect. And I
Hmm.
think the team has done an amazing job of lowering the time from like literally you going to the GitHub until you get those certain metric to like now I think it's under 7 minutes. But here is kind of more of the architecture diagram of how we kind of combined pieces together in order to create this offering.
This is great. And before you go on, maybe you can enlarge it a little bit.
Yeah.
Great. So, what's the best way to read this? From left to right?
Yeah, definitely from the sources, and then kind of how the data gets processed, and then how it gets accessed and kind of queried.
Hmm. So, on the left, we see all the different tools you mentioned, right? GitHub, GitLab. And that's where you said these tools are focused on workflows, not insights.
Exactly.
And so what happens next? You query the APIs. Let's go through this, and you use Airbyte for that.
Yes, and the Airbyte kind of writes the kind of entries. And because we also have two kind of use cases, one of them is analytical, but we also have a more of a transactional use case where people can act on that data. Then we use a tool called Hasura, which is a GraphQL kind of facade to a Postgres, where you can also have kind of GraphQL queries on top of the data. It's very useful for if you want to query and don't need to do the joins by yourself. We found GraphQL to be a great tool for that. But eventually, the data in the community edition gets manifested in Postgres.
Hmm.
And then what we do is we're kind of like I mentioned, we have two ways to optimize the queries. So it gets kind of in the raw form in more for GraphQL analysis, but we also then run a bunch of DPT kind of jobs on top of it, and we create basically what is an OLAP cube that is more optimized for BI and analytics. And we kind of do tools like Metabase, which is an open source BI tool like a Tableau or Looker competitor, that you can actually query all of these metrics from the database. And then we also, if needed, you can either use Metabase, or you can also take those dashboards and embed them in other tools like Notion or Confluence that you see here.
Hmm. Hmm. And now, if I, as a developer, install this community edition, do I need to be an expert on any of or all of these tools? Airbyte, DBT, Metabase?
So we are trying to make it as seamless as possible by abstracting, some of the complexities. But at least the community edition is more kind of optimized for people who do want the access to those underlying tools. Like Airbyte or Metabase and or DBT that they can use. We also have an enterprise offering that kind of has kind of a UI console that abstracts away all of these details, and then you kind of use just kind of one of the things. But what we found, and because a lot of the way that people hear about us are people already using Airbyte or already using Metabase or already using DBT, and they come and find it. For them, they actually do like to have that level of granularity.
Right. It's the product-led growth, probably,
Yeah.
right? Like they first like to try it out and actually understand at a granular level what works. Yeah, how it works. Okay, so you have Airbyte that, and does Airbyte cover all the connectors for you, or did you have to write your own ones for a few specific systems?
So we're actually most of the system. I think Airbyte when we started came maybe with just GitHub and Jira, and we added I don't know probably close to 70 now. If I'm
Oh
not
wow.
mistaken, we might be like Airbyte's like largest partner in terms of how many connectors we added. Actually, when we started, Airbyte did not exist yet, and we had to develop all of them ourselves. And then when the Airbyte community kind of became larger and larger, we decided to actually that we don't want to be in that business forever, and that's not part of our kind of core expertise. And we actually rebuilt all of our connectors and basically kind of contributed them to the Airbyte community.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. So Airbyte is the ELT part, and then you put that into Postgres. And for DBT, we talked about domain expertise. Do you provide a number of models that you use now to transform the raw data?
Yes, exactly. So Airbyte is kind of the extract and load part, and DBT is the one that we actually do and persist the metric. And basically, outside the kind of invisible thing of like, one way to think about Ferris, especially the community edition, as just a distribution of popular open source project. But what is the Ferris part of it is really two things. One is just the ability to deploy this entire thing with a single Docker compose command. But the other thing is also that it already comes pre-built with the schema that is appropriate for the kind of software engineering world, and a bunch of already kind of canned dashboards that also come with that.
Great. Yeah. And then dashboards, obviously, that's the Metabase part where you can
Yeah.
Analyze it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, well, in theory, people should be able to write their own SQL queries if they want to, right?
Exactly. So they can do whatever they want. And this is kind of the part that I was referring to before, which is we believe that there is a way that you can get most of the advantages of the modern data stack, but without kind of throwing the baby with kind of the bathwater, where still there is some domain expertise that is embedded in the system.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. So we've covered what we've covered now is there's a bunch of disparate systems. They're optimized on workflows, but not insights. Faros has taken standardized components or products from the modern data stack, Airbyte, DBT, Meltano, to make data ingestion easier. You're providing some opinions on top of that
Yep.
because you have DBT and then the visualization layer with Metabase. Can we talk now that we know the problem, how you solve it, how you acquire the data? Can we talk a little bit about the actual metrics? Like, what are some like in SaaS we have customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, net dollar retention. Like, what are some equivalents now for engineering?
Yeah, so that was really one of the questions that I was asking myself when I kind of started on this journey of like, okay, so let's say we know how to get all of the data in one place, and we know, but like, what is actually how do we measure it? And for that, I looked what kind of what is the state of the art in kind of that day, and we're talking now at least 5 years back. And unfortunately, and now when we're recording this, it's kind of back in vogue with Elon's kind of acquisition of Twitter, and measuring kind of lines of code. But that was kind of the state of the art. And being the open-minded person that I am, I said maybe I'm missing something. But when I try to kind of work with some of these vendors that had solution in space, and they were showing me some of these things. Reality, like there was absolutely no correlation between those metrics. If anything, it was probably was negative to my own perception of who are the star performers on my team and who are the people who were kind of struggling. The other thing that I also anecdotally notice is I think most of the problems that we had, and really when I think about like lost productivity, it wasn't the kind of underperformance of several individuals. It was always something was just not optimized in the process. And this is also like it's kind of makes a lot of sense when you think about all the analogies we listed, like in sales. Like usually when you think about kind of sales operations as a function, that function exists to kind of optimize sales processes, not so much to manage out underperforming reps. That obviously also happens, but it's like that is not where you're going to move the needle, because even if you rank and yank the bottom 10% and make them twice as good, then congratulations, you improve productivity by 20%.
Yeah.
Right? Like when what I was looking for is like, how can we improve it by an order of magnitude? And for that, it's really you have to focus on process. And then I discovered this organization that's called DORA, which stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. And that was kind of this eureka moment for me. Like I can't believe there is this organization that actually studied the problem with like a somewhat scientific approach on trying to determine what actually constitutes for an effective kind of engineering organization. And they came up with their first kind of state of DevOps report. I think it was like around 2014, and then I think around 2018 there was a book written about it that called Accelerate, that for everyone who's like in engineering leadership, I would highly recommend to read this book. And what they kind of uncovered is actually there are metrics that are highly predictive of kind of high performing engineering organizations. And that was kind of the starting point in this journey. And up even until today, that is probably the most common and sought after use case of our platform.
DORA metrics. Okay. Yeah. And how do so talk a little bit about how do people find you? What is the problem they're trying to solve? And then when first time they see, like my experience with other systems, the first time people see data, the first reaction is like, "Where have you been all these years? I've needed you." Like, and I assume it's no different for Faros. Like, what's that experience?
Yeah, so kind of funny because I'm actually coming to this podcast from having a conversation with engineering leader candidate that we're thinking about hiring. And what this lady told us is like, when I came to your website, it's like, oh my God, this is like exactly what I wanted all my life. And then now I can't believe it exists. So
Hmm.
so it is this profound because I think, like this is kind of the funny thing about what we do is one of these startups that makes just so much sense where people like just cannot believe it doesn't exist, right? It's like that's what kind of what we come, and that was my observation as well. So not to like harp too much on the cliche founder story, but like that was my problem where I decided to make that change and become more data driven. I asked my team to just go and look for, all of the existing solutions that already exist. And we just couldn't find one. Like we couldn't find one that really fit that criteria. And I think, that is part of what we were really looking for. And that's what led me to this like, modern data stack idea that we were not looking for a metrics vendor. We were looking for something that will be much more kind of malleable and flexible because some of these vendors came and they said, oh, we have these hundreds of metrics, and said, well, what if I want one that you don't have? Because really um, the process of improvement, this is a continuous process where you really kind of peel the onion until you get kind of to the truth, and every answer leads to more questions, right? So we said, hey, what if we if we find that thing and we want to go and investigate further? And they said, oh, that's awesome, just talk to our product team, we'll put it on a product roadmap, and in 6 months we will deliver you that metric that you asked for. And said, okay, that's not going to work, right? And especially then when I was at Salesforce, like my own engineering organization was much, much larger than some of these companies I was talking to. I'm saying like, I have the capabilities, just give me the tools. And that did not exist. And that what made me realize that actually, this is one of the things why, so many companies invested in building this modern data stack on their own, because they just need that flexibility. And that's just, kind of a non-starter for a company to say, no, you have to like rely on our product velocity in order for you to get your insights.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, Salesforce is obviously a very sophisticated and large organization, as you said. How do the other hyperscalers use this to solve this problem? I'm thinking like Google or Meta, right? I'm sure they're thinking about these same metrics the same way.
Yeah, so this is actually one of the, I would say, probably the biggest misconception that we have in this industry, because like the moment you start saying kind of hey, we should like measure engineering processes, people start, oh my God, but engineers don't like to be measured, like what are you talking about, everyone will quit and all that. And then we just tell the facts. So for example, my wife works at Google, and we are just also because of our work, I'm familiar with the Google developer productivity organization. That organization has 2,000 people in it, right? And if you grab a common engineer at Google and you would ask them, are you happy that that organization exists or not? The answer will be an empathetic yes. Like it's like I cannot imagine working at Google without 2,000 people that are there to make my life as an engineer better and more productive. Because as you know, probably the worst thing you can do to an engineer is like just make them battle with like these outdated and hard to kind of navigate tech stack. And this is what kind of I guess made this company. So like I said, there's like 2,000 people in Google that work on this topic. There's 1,500 Meta. There's like other companies that have hundreds and hundreds of engineers that are dedicated to this. And my message to like all the engineering leaders that kind of listen to us is stop kidding yourself as like just saying like, oh, we don't need that, we have everything going well for us. There is like serious investment that happen in those elite companies that make kind of the trains run on time.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And when what is sort of the mind shift the journey to that mind shift that your users have to make when they come? What are the adjust? Because in my experience, it's all great when you have a new tool and data, but at the end of the day, you're talking change management. You need to work with people, right? So, what have you seen from your customers, like the most successful ones? What's the change?
Yeah, so by far, the change is really, is very, very simple to explain, but, not that simple. It's like we now have large public companies, customers, where every single engineering staff meeting is now starts with like, okay, there's a kind of a Faros dashboard that they're all looking on in order to kind of, run the meeting. There is no more like hand waving, and there's no more kind of like spreadsheets that by the time they get collected they're already outdated, and then half of the meeting gets wasted on like debating the kind of accuracy of the data that is being presented. Like everyone starts, okay, this is where we are. And it's like, and the crazy thing about it is like if you tell the story to anyone in like engineering or marketing or manufacturing or anything else, they're like, that just what do you mean, like what is the innovation here? But when you tell it to engineering that actually like staff meetings are run with data, like that seems like science fiction almost, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that is kind of, and then really what we also argue. So I'll give you an example. Everyone now is talking about digital transformation and all that. The problem is like there is no like one thing that you need to do. There is like like dozens and dozens of process improvements that you need to do in order. So now the question that we ask the kind of the customers and prospects is like, how do you know where to start? Like, should you implement CI CD? Should you like move to microservices? Should you move to the cloud? Right? Like, and the thing is, like, a lot of these decisions are made on hype, where there was like some senior engineer that went to some conference that saw like some presentation from Google or Uber, and then they say, "Oh my God, like we have to implement those things. This looks so cool." But if you think about it, this is just so crazy, kind of that way that we run today. Like these R&D budgets are some of the largest budgets in companies, and that is the way we make decisions. So what we offer, basically as an alternative, look, don't guess, right? Just instrument the at least the high level, and this is where DORA metrics actually comes as a good proxy for that. Instrument, understand where your bottleneck is, and then start solving that. And this is because if you're not addressing the bottleneck, then every other change that you make will not have the impact that you think it will have.
yeah, yeah. And once they have adopted that philosophy, I assume you have a customer success team.
Yep.
What are some of the happy quotes you've gotten after 3 to 6 months? Like, what are some of the where users come, "Oh my God, this has been so transformational for us." Do you have some examples?
Yeah, so we definitely have them with anything like from like just a sheer. So we have a very happy customer that the first time they kind of implement the system, they're like, oh my God, where there's a wall, there is now a window that I can actually see it. And I would say that probably one of the surprising things is on most level, it's just a very kind of low level emotional response that I now can start seeing things. But the things that were, I would say, probably like more kind of ROI measurable things that we can point to is, and that is very, very consistent, and it was just mentioning the bottlenecks, is when we show kind of engineering leaders that actually in many cases their bottleneck is the quality assurance process and not actually the new feature development, right? So if your bottleneck is like, and the way it manifests itself is like, for example, you have a lot of features that are getting done, but then they get like weeks and sometimes months at a time stuck in some QA or staging environment, right?
Hmm.
And the thing that we, before they go to production, this is also one of the, largest also misconception. Like people measure like things in Jira, whether you close tickets. That doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter when the engineer. Like the only thing that matters is when the code is in production, in the hands of the users that can access, that functionality. That is the only thing that we're all optimizing for. And then you see like these, weeks and months at a time spent on like some, environment that no one is looking at, and they're like, and the again, and the funny thing that happens is, guess what? There is a CEO like yourself or myself that complain like, why did we hire all these engineers, but things are actually moving slower? And then, most VP engineers that don't have access to our tooling, what do? They go and hire more engineers. These
Yeah.
engineers write more features, right? And they actually like, make that, bottleneck even worse. It's like, if you think about, you're stuck in traffic in a road, and then you have some genius that comes in and say, oh, let's add more cars, right? So that is kind of, and as we show them, and in some cases, the solution is fairly trivial. It's just like, you should kind of change the resource allocation from just working on new tasks to doing more, quality assurance tasks. Whether it's automated, manual, like that's, an implementation detail that each customer does based on project and all of that. But just by changing priorities, start seeing that customers get features much much faster.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if this is true, but I darkly remember how Larry Ellison in the early days of Oracle, when when teams would hit deadlines, they would say, "Let me help you by taking an engineer away from your team." So he wouldn't
Yep.
add; he would subtract, right? He would remove people. Okay. Uh, so then, and we talked a lot about the open source, the different components. If somebody wants to go and try it out, they can use the community edition. Now, obviously, Faros is also available as a managed SaaS version, right? And
Yep.
I looked at it; it's a super reasonable pricing, right? I believe it's $15 per month per contributor. So, which like, why would you not spend that if your overall engineering organization gets more productive that way, right? It's a no brainer.
Yeah, and this is kind of like we were talking to many customers about it. But look, it's kind of a sad where people, when people realize they have a problem, then they spin up a team with like 8 engineers, a product manager, and an engineering manager in order to try to build what already exists.
Yeah, yeah. And what is your recommendation now? So when people hear this, they see your website, they sign up and everything, but what is your recommendation now when they adopt Faros? Like what are the things they need to do that will make them successful?
Yeah, so probably the best predictor, and this is not different with us than I would say probably any other enterprise software, is don't boil the ocean, right? There's like, and we as a young organization ourselves, we had our own, where kind of learnings from how our customer success should behave post sales, and where there is probably one predictor that predicts whether that implementation will be successful or not, whether we boil the ocean or not. In some cases, it's just like start with, let's say, DORA metrics. There's only 4 of them. Start with tracking 4 metrics and start looking at this and start optimizing them, and then add things more as you see fit, as opposed to let's start and instrument 100 metrics that take data from dozen of systems, and start trying to kind of go and implement them for every single sub organization that we have in the company. And so unfortunately we had those kind of full stars with some of our customers that we then were able to fix. But it's kind of keep it simple, stupid. That's really
Yeah.
the recommendation I can give.
Yeah. Perfect. And do you have some sort of community where people can come and maybe share their experiences or their
Yeah,
experience?
so we have also a community Slack that's part of the kind of community edition, and there's like a bunch of people now where like it's kind of fun. We're in this stage at a company where it's not only employees of our company that answer questions, right? We actually have people who are not employed with us that also answer questions. And that is kind of the cool thing about, like, this is probably like why most communities kind of get started in share. So there's definitely exists, and we're trying to be very involved. And by the way, not accidentally, part of our design of the system is using all of these open source components that come with their own communities, right? So for example, if you have a problem with Airbyte, there is a fairly large community that you can go to and ask questions. If you have a problem with Metabase, there is another community that you can go and ask questions. And so we actually kind of were able to hack some of our support on the early days by kind of relying on those communities.
That's the promised land for any company when you have your own customers solving problems for other customers.
Yeah, and again, we're not all the way there yet, but it started to show kind of signs of promise.
Great, great. And then I want to mention, I mean, just for people who do want to give it a shot, it's I'm just going to share my screen real quick here so people can see your website. I'm going to share the Chrome tab. So it's Faros.ai, right?
Yep.
That's when people want to check it out. It's the connected engineering operations platform. And I guess the connected part relates to the part that you collect data from disparate sources, right? And so it's all
E-
connected.
Exactly, and this is where we actually thought that like what would be the good word to put there. That is where we kind of we put. And by the way, this is Larson exclusive for you. In a couple of weeks, we will have a brand new website that I'm like very very excited about, and that's so that will be kind of something also to share.
Okay, yeah, we can. I mean, this one is great already, but I know, like every founder is always unhappy about their own website, right? But let me
Yes.
tell you, I think yours is very clear. There's nothing to worry about. I think it's good. It tells me exactly what I get and why I need it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, but like you're absolutely right. Like it's I just also came up for a meeting discussing our new website, and I told him, oh my god, I love it, but I feel that in 6 months I'm probably gonna hate it, and we're gonna do a new version.
Yeah, yeah. Vitaly, this has been super insightful. Thank you so much for educating us about Faros. And if people want to reach out to you, what's a good way to reach you, to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm Vitaly Gordon on Twitter. I'm also available on LinkedIn, where you can find me. I'll also gonna give a tip for everyone who wants to know how to kind of pronounce my name. Now LinkedIn has the feature that you can click on that it kind of helps with name pronunciation. There is might be some Easter egg hidden there as well. So I encourage people to try, and just we have our community Slack, which I'm also there, and I'm just in general a very reachable person. And obviously there is also the infrastructure group that you and I met on, that I'm also going to spend some time on.
Yeah, that's a great place in general. Perfect. Well, Vitaly, thanks so much. This concludes the session, and let's go ship some infrastructure.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Vitaly.
Yeah. My well, thank you for having me.
Pleasure.